Good morning and welcome to the Flexible Space Association's Workspace Wisdom Webinar. I'm Jane Sartin, I'm the Executive Director of FlexSA. It's been quite a while since we've had these webinars, but we ran a few at the start of last year and they seemed a really good way of bringing informative information to the flexible workspace community. So I'm pleased that today we are looking at compliance matters with Inga Taylor and Siobhan Henderson of Opstech Services, and they're going to take us through a presentation with lots of information, and then we'll come back on and have questions. But we've got a few questions that have been pre-submitted. If you've got any more as we go along, please, if you can put them in the chat function, but then we'll take them all at the end. And Siobhan and Inga are going to present for around 20 to 25 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions. So I shall get the presentation up and hand over to Inga and Siobhan.
Great, thank you very much, Jane. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you all this morning. We have a thrilling topic for you, and we're going to attempt to demystify anti-money laundering for flexible workspace providers. We are very familiar with compliance in the flexible workspace world. Both Siobhan and I have worked for operators and then now support operators. So my name is Inga Taylor. I'm from Opstech Services, and I'm presenting today with.
Hi, I'm Siobhan.
And so we'll be topping and tailing and switching who's presenting through the presentation today, just so you have a bit more variety. So this slide just shows you some of the things that we've heard about compliance and how we know it's a difficult topic to cover. It's a 57-page long document and it is rather confusing. So hopefully we will clarify things for you today. We're going to cover compliance for virtual offices, compliance for residential office clients, and then talk a little bit about suspicious activity. We'll also review and explain the following terms that you may well have all heard of: a trust and company service provider, TCSP, know your customer, KYC, and explain a suspicious activity report, ASAR. I'm sure that you're familiar with some of these, and as you know, it is a big topic, so we're going to get through as much as we can. We're just starting with what's a TCSP. So all companies have to follow some anti-money laundering prevention within their business. Flexible workspace providers come under the guidance of a trust and company services provider. So it means that you have to register to be a TSCP with HMRC. So the registration process is normally completed by the business owner or a senior director of the company. It depends on the size of your organisation and your structure who would fill in that application online. You would need to know some information about the company and its setup and to fill that in. The form will take about an hour to complete, maybe half an hour. And during the course of the application process, you will have to supply the following documents, and Siobhan's going to go into more detail about these later on: a risk assessment, a compliance policy statement, and some process and control documents. The whole process could take 6 to 8 weeks on average. It's very, very rare that we've seen it be much quicker than that. We have seen it take longer than that. One bit of advice that we would say is keep the answers simple all through the application process. HMRC deal with applications from all manner of companies and business types, and the more jargon that we use, the more complicated it is for them to decipher where you fit in. So just keep it simple. It costs you £300 per location to register, and any directors or beneficial owners should undertake the fit and proper test. That's £150 per person. And then there's an annual re-registration fee of £300 per location. If you fail to register or are caught advertising virtual offices but you haven't registered, which is probably the way that HMRC would find you, the fines start from £350, but they're unlimited. And if they really wanted to, they could prosecute you under a civil process, and that could incur up to 2 years in prison. So although it's a sort of bit of a process to go through to register, it's worth registering. So we now come on to who needs to register. So there are some myths and facts that we're going to go through this to try and explain this. So one myth that we hear is that providing a mail collection only service falls outside of the regulations, so therefore you don't need to register. So that's if somebody is coming to your premises to collect post. It's seen to be a possible workaround because that we may not see that as technically mail forwarding. However, the fact is HMRC considers providing any of the following services come under mail forwarding. So if you provide any of these to a non-resident client, registered office, business address, correspondence address, administrative address, regardless of how the post is collected, you have to register as a TCSP to provide any of these services. Part 2 is you must register with HMRC as a TCSP if you're only selling offices. This, in fact, is not true. You do not have to register with HMRC, and we have verified it with HMRC again this week because we wanted to be crystal clear. So we have it in writing for them that if you are only providing a registered address to a resident client that is in the building that you see, then you don't have to register with HMRC. However, we would say it is prudent that you document that and you just have a process in place and a risk. I think the reason that HMRC don't make you register is it is quite hard to keep a check on Companies House to see who's using user registered address, and clients don't always tell you, but you don't have to register. I'm now going to pass you over to Siobhan, who's going to give you the filling in the middle of all this interesting topic and give you the building blocks that we believe are about building your compliance process within your business.
Lovely, thank you, Inga. Okay, so as we've talked about, the guidance, it's 57 pages long. It's quite a read. But overall, it is the senior managers who are responsible for managing the compliance within your business. So what we're going to go through is the foundations from a high level and the steps that you need to take. So looking at the foundations, you need to start with a business risk assessment. We know the risk is virtual office in this industry because it's non-face-to-face. So you need to identify where your business could be vulnerable to money laundering and how you could be used. You put processes in place to mitigate those risks. It can be really simple. It doesn't have to be a 50-page document. It is a one-page document. It's normally about 7 or 8 different points that are risks. So make sure you keep it simple. Once you've done your business risk assessment, you would then do a compliance policy or a compliance statement. This document outlines your controls and procedures you're going to put in place to manage your risks that you've identified in your risk assessment. And this will include how you're going to do your due diligence by identifying, verifying your beneficial owners of the company, your team training, your auditing of your records, and your suspicious activity process. Be practical and realistic with this. Do not overpromise. The next step would be appointing a nominated officer. The role of the nominated officer is to investigate any suspicious activity. Now, you may recognize this as something called a SARS, which is a suspicious activity report. And where appropriate, they will report that to the National Crime Agency. This should be a senior person within your business. They're available, they can make decisions, they have access to all the data. That person can also do other tasks within the business. It depends on the makeup of your business. So they can do other compliance tasks, but that is their sole responsibility. Then you're going to register with the National Crime Agency. It's a really simple setup. It gives the nominated officer the ability to report suspicious activity to the NCA. Once you've done that, you can then register with HMRC. You will complete the registration as a trust and company service provider on the .gov website. And if you need to, you can stop and save and return to the registration. You don't have to do it all in one go. So that is the first level of steps. And now we're going to go on to the tools. So your controls and your procedures. So this is what you've put in place to reduce your risk based on your risk assessment. These are forms that you use to capture your client information. Client risk assessment, and that helps you decide if a client poses a risk to your business, your suspicious activity forms, and your training records. You also need to train your teams. Based on their role and the procedures you've put in place, they must follow. So I would recommend you train your teams annually. If you only get 1 to 2 virtual offices a month, then it's not something to do very often. So annually is better, but you must do that up to every 2 years. This also includes new starters. So their compliance training should be part of their induction, and they shouldn't be processing any post until they've been trained. The next level is our ongoing monitoring. So this is where we're going to be auditing everything we have. So you have your client files and your auditing. Would you be holding copies of ID, proof of home address for your beneficial owners, along with other documents? You must audit these to make sure they're relative and in date. Now, this can be done periodically or annually, but in your compliance policy, you will have outlined how you're going to manage your audits. So you may state in your policy that you're going to audit every year, or you're going to do 10 virtual offices a month or 20, depending on where you have. It depends how practical it is and how you can manage that within your business. Whatever you state in your policy, you must do. So this brings me on to the policies and controls. You must monitor the effectiveness of these. Once you have put all of this in place, these tend to be reviewed annually, or if there's a change in the regulation, or if you're offering a new product or service, you would review your risk, your policies, controls, and procedures to ensure it's all still relative for that product and it's practical. If you find it's not working for you or there's some extra steps you want to add, you can update these, making your centre teams aware or do some retraining on it. But all of these steps, everything you've put in place here, supports your day-to-day, which we're going to look at next. So in your day-to-day, it's basically your virtual office client signing up. You complete your due diligence, ensure the client poses no risk to your business, and you start the service. You tell your centre teams they've got a new VO, and you add the details to your post list. Your centre teams are the eyes and ears. They get to know the client. They'll be able to update you if a beneficial owner has moved or if a new beneficial owner has started within the business. And this is where you'll ask for the appropriate documents and follow your own process if you have somebody new or somebody moving. If the team do experience any suspicious activity, they must report this to the nominated officer. And we will go into that in a little bit more detail later. But all of this is managed at time of sign up and then for the duration of the service for the virtual office. So I'm going to hand back to Inga.
Right, thank you. So I hope that's helped to just illustrate the key elements and really reduce the sort of 57 pages into things that you have to do. I understand that there's still may well be some questions. So if you've got any at the end, please do ask them. So that's really the element for virtual offices, for non-resident offices. And what about for resident office clients? What do you have to do? So there is a belief that you still need to hold copies of passports and details, proof of ID for all of the your office customers. In fact, you don't. You don't have to be registered with HMRC to provide office space, and there's no hard and fast rules about what you have to do to verify that the company that you're doing business with. You won't get fined, and HMRC won't check up on you. However, we would still advise that you follow some good best practice due diligence and that you know who you're doing business with. So you may have heard about KYC, know your customer, and you need to really pick what's relevant for your own business. So at a minimum, we would suggest you look up the company on Companies House. You click through to their beneficial owners. I tend to click through on the beneficial owner to see how many directorships they have, because I just think it's a gut feeling more about whether that person is in lots of companies. You can look at their filed accounts. You could Google them if you wanted to, the same way that you would do with a VO. But the most important thing is that you've got the correct legal entity on your license agreement or contract, and you've got it's signed by somebody who has authority within the business to sign it, because that just protects you. You might want to do other financial checks. You might use online systems to do some checks. That's fine. That's all part of your own best practice, but it's not regulated and it won't be audited and reviewed by HMRC for office clients. Oh, I'm going to hand back to Siobhan.
Right, so suspicious activity. First and foremost, this applies to all of your clients. If you're a TCSP, you would have to report any client type if you do experience that's office, meet room, virtual office. It can be really hard to put into words suspicious activity. It's that gut feeling you get. It's something, it tells you that something's wrong. Now your teams get to know their clients. So when something is out of the norm for the client or for the situation, it could be suspicious. It's very unlikely you're ever going to overhear a client talking about how much money that they've laundered that week. It's not as simple as that. So I'm going to go through just a couple of the examples below that are warning signs that you may have heard or may have experienced, but I won't go through them all. So one of a big red flag for me, if a client was signing up for virtual office and they were reluctant or refused point blank to give you ID, that's definitely a red flag. It's totally the norm these days to provide ID. You know, if you're going for foreign currency, open a bank account, you're not asking an unreasonable request. So if they refuse that, that's a big flag. A client paying for a service they're not using. So if a client signs up for an office and you may have done a move-in meeting, provide them with keys, but they've never moved in or never moved any computers or files or anything into their office, that is another flag. Why would they be paying for something and not using it? Clients being over-friendly, buying gifts for the team, paying for nights out, minimal items in their office, not using your handsets, always on their mobile. This could be some of the behaviours of a boiler room. Now, if you've never heard of a boiler room before, it's a high volume outgoing call centre, pressurising people into invest in items that either don't exist or have no return on investment. So if you start to see people exhibiting this type of behaviour, is definitely a red flag and something that you should report. So in the unlikely event that one of your team experiences suspicious activity, they must report it to the nominated officer, and you would normally have some sort of internal form that they would fill out. They will investigate it and if appropriate, report it. But we need to make sure that the centre team does not make the client aware that they've reported them. This is called tipping off, and it does come with some consequences. Thank you. Over to Inga.
Thanks, Siobhan. One that always gets me on that suspicious activity is also if there's a really high churn of employees, it just, on their own, not one of these things is necessarily suspicious, but together they just form a pattern. You know, for a virtual, it could be getting that they've had 6 letters a month for, you know, the past year, and all of a sudden they're getting boxes that are, you know, lots of heavy boxes that don't seem that they're personal and just strange. It's a change in the normal behaviour for a client. So the next slide is we've called it the elephant in the room because I feel there's a slight grey area about this, and Siobhan feels it's very black and white. So we're going to give you the two sides of it, and really this will help to illustrate how you need to potentially evaluate risks within your own business and how you plan for them. So we're fully aware that a number of operators, and we've worked with them, will offer a business continuity type of service or a virtual office for a month, 3 months when a client leaves. And normally that's a paid for service. Sometimes it's free. But in my view, the risk is more minimal because if that client has been a resident in the building for 6 months, 3 years, 6 years, 10 years, you know them, you've seen their coming and goings, you would recognise the people, and you've been dealing with their post anyway. I have less of a problem with this service being provided on a fixed term period. Siobhan, however, sees it rather differently.
I do.
Differently.
I do see it very differently. I mean, I've worked in this industry, ran centres. I've been in this industry for 20 years, and I've run centres, and we've let people pick up posts for a week. It's gone into 2 weeks, and then that's gone into a month, and then we've forgotten all about it, and it becomes the norm to just give them the post. My view is protect your business. This is not just a tick list exercise. You know, it is just making sure you are protecting your business. Give them a proper contract, a virtual office contract, nice start and end date. Make sure you go through your due diligence. That would protect my team, my business. That is my view on it. You have a process in place, just use it. Nice and simple. But yes, we disagree.
Yeah, but I think it's an interesting point that depending on where your building is, how many clients you have, how long people have been resident clients, the important thing is that you document it. And if you're doing your risk assessment and you acknowledge that you are providing this service, I don't think you should do it below the radar, but you acknowledge that you're providing this service and justify, I'm doing this because the client has been resident for more than X years. Then that's up to you. The important thing is whatever is in your risk assessment and policy, you must adhere to and do. So if you are found, and this is where I actually support Siobhan's view, if you're found keeping post for a client that you don't have the compliance documents and the checks to support, and you can't say they were a recent leaver of the building, this is just post that's come in the last week, then you could be fined from HMRC. So we felt it was a worthy debate for you to see the two sides of how you might process it and how you might want to evaluate other risks within your own business. So we're coming to an end, and we're just going to have a summary of the must-dos. I won't read them all. They were part of the building blocks. I believe the slides will be available afterwards, and you can go back and look at this. So you must register if you're providing any mail forwarding service that includes mail collection to any non-resident client. And you have to have a policy and processes in place to manage it, train your teams, audit your files, and keep re-registering annually. If you let your registrations lapse, you will likely have to reapply, cost you a little bit more, but it will take a number of weeks. And in the meantime, you should not be providing the service. So please diarise your re-registration annually and make sure that you do it in a timely manner. For those of you that are inside the London area, you also have to register for the LLA, which is the local London authorities with trading standards, which has slightly stricter rules on mail handling. There are some recommended best practices. So whilst you don't have to register and follow any formal guidelines, if you are providing office services to office only clients, even if that's a registered address, we would still say it's good practice for you to have documented what risks you might have, set your own minimum know your customer standards. So whatever checks you want to do. And again, it's really trusting your gut. If at move-in, somebody wants to move in starting on Monday and they're a 20-person office and it just seems a bit fast and you're not too sure about the people, look into it. Do some more checks on them. And then report suspicious activity. But none of this is formally regulated. So that's us. Back to Jane. Thank you very much for your time, and we're happy to answer your question.
Okay, thank you very much, Inga and Siobhan. A lot of information packed in there, but I think really, really well explained and clearly. So we've had a few questions submitted. One during the questions, which I'll just release session rather, and I'll just release those in a minute. But just to take one of the pre-submitted questions first, do we have to register as a TCSP if we outsource compliance?
I'll take this one. So if you are using something like a reseller, if that is a reseller within your business, this is a little bit of a grey area, because a reseller like Moneypenny, they used to be Avanta Virtual, they can be classed as a supplier of yours, so a supplier of the service. So if you're not providing any other virtual officer services, then probably no, you wouldn't need to register as a TCSP. If you see them as a client of yours, if they're a virtual office client of yours and they're selling your virtual offices, then yes, you would. So it would be depending on the situation, but normally if they are a supplier of your VOs and you don't do VOs, then no, you should be fine.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, just to add to that, you still might audit or do some checks on them. That's up to you. So, I would just say if you're selecting an outsourced partner, you can ask them to dot the I's and cross the T's so that you're happy with them.
Okay. Just to pick up a couple of the easy questions that have come in, there's been one asking whether the presentation will be sent out and another about the recording. And yes, both of those things will happen. We will be sharing the recording afterwards and the presentation with attendees or with anyone that's requested. Okay, another question that was pre-submitted. How should we store client documents? How long do we need to keep them?
So your documents are kept for 5 years from the last date of the contract. So if the client leaves today, you keep it for 5 years. Most people store it electronically. You can have a backup copy. Some people do store it as in hard copies. I would probably recommend that you do it electronically and keep them in one place. So it's nice, easy access. And then it's easy for auditing. If you're keeping it locally on site and you're auditing your documents, you have to go to that location. So yeah, electronic and for 5 years.
The data person in me, the sort of neat data would want, when the client leaves, that you put it in a folder of people that have left that year, because then you can manage your own data storage and delete them much more easily. And if you are keeping paper copies, make sure they're not at reception and unlocked at night, because obviously it's personal customer information. So make sure that it's locked away.
Okay, thank you. And then, so we've had a couple of questions in during the time the webinar has been taking place, which are hopefully viewable in the chat box. So firstly, we have a client who has 27 beneficiaries listed on Companies House. We approached the client regarding having to carry out searches on all these people, but they stated only 7 are beneficial interest partners, none of whom have a 25% share or more. All others do not have a fixed share, they have a salary share. Do we still have to check them all?
That's an interesting one, because normally you check 25%, anyone who owns 25% or more. If it's something like a trust or something on those lines, there is specific information that's on the guidance. All of this, you take a risk-based approach. So if it's something like a trust or a charity or something like that, I would look to speak to who is the person who makes the decisions on the day-to-day basis and the running of the company, and get their information. But I would make sure I documented this on my risk assessment to say why I did it, and what are the checks that I did. I agree, it's unrealistic to get 27 forms of ID and proof of home addresses. So you have to be a bit realistic. If you can stand by your decision, I can't see there being a problem with that, of having 1 to 2 of the main people who run the business.
Yeah, and just to add to that, certainly anybody that is going to collect post, if they're collecting it for other people or that you're forwarding the mail on for, you must do the full checks on and see the details of the address that you're sending post to if you're sending it.
Yeah, so yeah, I agree with that. If I've got 10 people are getting post to the home address, I would verify those home addresses. If it's just going to one address and one director, I mean, to be fair, we don't get a lot of posts these days, then I would only do the one. But if they are asking for the post to go out to individual addresses, then I would say, yes, you would have to ask for it, because then there is a bit more of a risk.
Okay, thank you. And then another one that's come in this morning. Can you provide more information on the LLA registration? Just try Googling the info, but unable to find the correct link. I mean, maybe that's something we can share as well, because I'm sure there is information online.
Yeah, there is.
I don't remember whether this is in our compliance guide as well, that's in the members area of our website. And I know this has come from a member, so should have access to this, but can you help on that?
Yeah, so the London Local Authorities Act came in I think it was 2007. It's adopted by trading standards, but not all trading standards have adopted. So City of London, Westminster, Camden, some have adopted this, and each one should have information on their website, and you have to register with them. It's more specific where the MLR can be open to interpretation, and it's about your risk. The LLA is very specific. It is about mail forwarding. It does ask you to get the ID documents of all directors, anybody getting post. So it is very prescriptive in what it does. What we tend to find, if you've got locations that are outside of London, but also some inside of London that have adopted that in those boroughs, we would do a best practice for all. And you can speak to trading standards and talk to them about it. We can provide information on that. There is Westminster have actually got a very good guide on their website, and it is the same for all pretty much. There is a list of which boroughs have adopted the LLA. So I would go to that list first, check who's adopted it. If any of your centres aren't in those boroughs, you just stay with the MLR.
I think that list is on the compliance document on the FlexSA website as well, and the links are all through there.
Great. Okay, thank you. Yes, so that's that for members of the Flexible Space Association, you should have, or you can get access to the closed members area of our website, which and that's one of the many documents that are in that area. So to pick up on, we've had a couple of questions that were pre-submitted, one of which I've pasted myself into the chat box because it includes a link asking whether it can be used from the government website, if it can be used as the list of proof of ID and proof of home address for virtual office clients. And I think this is a link that you've checked.
Yes.
So
yeah, I checked the link. Yeah, it's on the .gov website. It's a list of their what they accept as proof of ID, and it's, you know, it is a passport, driving license, the proof of home address, mortgage statement, a telephone bill. So yeah, there's a list there, and that's what they would expect you to use. I tend to find, you know, I wouldn't have the whole of all of this list on my training guides. I would just pick out the most realistic ones that clients will tend to have. I mean, it's difficult these days because not everybody gets post. Most things are online. So I pick out several of these and use them as your, you know, if you want to give that information to the client, going, this is, you can use one of these documents. If they don't have that information, you can refer back to that list. But yeah, that is the correct list.
One thing on that, on just checking data, we would also advise people to check for, let's say, homemade copies of such documents. If a logo is really fuzzy, or the color isn't quite right, or the formatting, if something has come in the post, it normally has a really good kind of machine folded halfway through or three-way fold. If somebody is printing a document at home, I mean, that sounds like the most basic of checks, then you often don't have that fold in the paper. So if everything else doesn't look right, but you don't have the folds, that's a kind of really visual way. And, you know, often it sounds, again, a silly little thing, paper quality feels a bit different if you've printed at home than if you've got it through the post sometimes, because it is hard to validate documents. On this, there is, you know, we didn't mention it because we didn't want to go too broad, but there are some online software or ID verification checkers, which, again, you know, if somebody wants to talk to us about it, we can recommend a few options that you could have a look at that take some of the risk out of you doing this yourself, but there's a cost. So it's not right for everybody.
Okay, thank you. Some helpful tips there. And then the other pre-submitted question was, are there any ways to mitigate liability for virtual tenants as a landlord/property manager?
Do you want to take? Yeah, well, I mean, doing your due diligence, there's when you say mitigating your liability, if you do your due diligence, have everything in place, that's as much as you can do, if I've understood the question correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Siobhan. It's very difficult to mitigate the risk. It doesn't matter who's providing the service. So if you're providing the service and you don't want to be responsible for doing the checks, then I would use electronic software or outsource those checks, or but otherwise, you know, you've got to just actually go through the process and do the checks. Yeah, so that's it. I'm just having a look at the other questions that are coming.
Yes, so they're coming in thick and fast now. The last of these webinars I think we had was on business rates, and similarly, lots of questions. It's another area of real interest in the industry. Taking them in order, for in-residence customers taking space in a centre, to confirm we aren't required to take KYC such as proof of registered address for is that limited, for example? And if so, I'm guessing we don't need ID for directors.
You don't need to, for resident customers, need to do any of it. I would. So I have looked up addresses from Companies House a couple of times. I have put addresses from Companies House into Google and had a look. I once found one that it was didn't look like the appropriate property, let's just say, that would have been used as a registered address, and we did a little bit more investigation into the individual, but you don't have to do any checks. And that this was for a resident company that wanted to move in quite quickly, was quite pushy to get the contract and everything signed, and actually it was a salesperson that flagged it up as you know, it just feels a bit wrong. So we just looked into it a little bit more, but you don't have to. So if everything looks all right and feels all right, it is even quite hard to prove your registered address. Even HMRC now is trying to encourage you to get electronic deliveries of notifications from Companies House or HMRC and not having them sent in post to your registered address, which always used to be the case. So it's tricky. And no, you wouldn't need ID for directors. But again, if you have any concern, or if they're an out-of-state company, so they're not a UK company, and you want to just do a few other checks, if you wanted to verify that the person signing the license agreement and contract is the right person, then that's fine and up to you, but you don't need to do everybody.
Okay, thank you. The next one's an interesting one. We're a flex space that provides physical office spaces only, but have a client base with us who provides virtual office and mail forwarding facilities, and they are HMRC registered. Do we as a flex space need to be registered with HMRC?
Siobhan, do you want to take it?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we touched on before. So if you're only providing office clients, then that's fine. If you've got, I would imagine this is probably somebody who's either an accountancy firm or solicitor who also fall under as a TCSP, they will have lots of clients. So you may get post for several different companies care of the solicitors. It's absolutely normal for this to happen, especially when accountants, because the only people that want to write to your registered address is HMRC, and who you're going to give that to? It's to your accountant. So you would have to do, they will have an MLR number. They will have to follow all the processes that we've gone through. So I would, obviously you'll have a contract with them. I would have it noted what their MLR number is. At any point they can share their policy, their risk assessment, their statement. I would ask for and have a little look at those as well. And then you can have a check on their due diligence, because it is another company registered at your address. I would also probably charge them for the privilege of doing their post, but that's a slightly separate matter. But yeah, I would make sure I would do my due diligence on the solicitor's firm or the accountancy or whoever, the other TCSP, and just make sure that you've got all those records. And I had one recently with a client who is an accountancy, and we went through to all their checks, and they were really happy to give over the information, because they know and they understand what it is to be compliant. So yeah, I would make sure I've got all those documents, or if I've read those documents, and note it down. HMRC it's all about showing your work. It's all about having these documents in writing, proving why you've made that decision. And for this, you can just put a note on the client file of what you've done.
One thing to add to that, I would also ask them monthly to update you if they have any new clients. So I'd have a process in place, because if you are processing the mail and taking the mail in and putting it all in their pigeonhole, you need to know who you're taking mail for. And if they've stopped providing a service to anybody, they need to highlight that you need to put return to sender on those. So I would do that in writing formally with them. So an email exchange, something that you can file away and go, I am doing, on top of making sure that I'm not collecting posts or allowing them to collect posts for anybody they shouldn't. So just to confirm, you don't need to register with HMRC if your client is doing it, but you should make sure your client is following the right process.
Great, thank you. Right, let's try and rattle through a few hopefully straightforward questions. We have overseas customers and have difficulty tracing beneficial owners once the trail leaves the UK. How far should we go?
Well, I mean, this is where your, electronic verification is really helpful, because there is companies out there that have the rights for other countries' companies' house. So there is a lot of, every country tends to have a company's house or a version of it you can actually log into and have a little look. But there is electronic software that actually has all the access, and you can do on that. But it is quite difficult. It's a little bit of a grey area that if you can't have access to whatever country, if it's from a high risk country, then I would probably start thinking about not taking that client. But if it's for a company in Ireland, there is a company's house for Ireland. You can go and look in it, but you obviously can only go as far as what open searches can give you. I would definitely do my risk assessment. If you didn't have any of the concerns, they're providing everything else with your ID, and if they're telling you they're the only beneficial owner, you could say that you're going to pass them on your risk assessment, but you're going to monitor them just for a couple of months. And again, this is you doing an active risk assessment on the client. So I would probably do something like that. It's difficult to say about depending on which country it is, but do check, because most companies house do, or most countries do have their own companies house.
I have looked up the French one and some of the other European ones, but it is more difficult to understand what good looks like on these other sites, because I'm not as familiar with it. The one question note on that I have, and almost question back to you, Siobhan, to just double check it, is I would check that they are doing business in the UK and providing a service in the local area. There was a recent change to the regulations that says you shouldn't provide a virtual office to somebody that isn't offering a service in your area. Now, we're aware that an accountant in a particular area or particular type of solicitor, or some businesses, it's not location specific. So actually you could provide it, and it's a sector or service specific thing. So they could be advertising a regional office, but others are more specific to that region. So I would look at the nature of business and just that they are providing a service locally. And I would expect them to have a good grasp of the English language, because if they're providing a service in the UK. Yeah, sorry, Jane.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in because there's another question that's come in linked, which maybe we can pick up at the same time. Can we offer a VO to a company that is based overseas and is not registered on Companies House?
This brings in an interesting one. So yes, you can. You have always been able to do that. There was a change in the regs, or addition to the regs, at the end of last year, which we have to monitor as TCSPs by April, I think. So any company who is leases, rents a building in the UK, but is registered overseas, actually now has to register at Companies House, and they should have all done this by the end of this month. So if they're not if they're just a virtual office and they're overseas, again, do as much checks as you possibly can. But if they give you an address of an office within the UK, then they have to be registered on Companies House. That's coming in. We have to monitor this and do checks for as of April, I think it is.
Okay. Okay, back to the list in the order. Keeping the documents for 5 years, is this for both VO as well as resident clients?
Yes, I mean, really keeping your documents, some of it is a VAT requirement, so it's accountant's requirement, and it's not just compliance that you have to keep documents for a number of years after the clients have left. So your finance team would probably advise on that. But yeah, it's really for all clients, you should keep documents for 5 years.
Okay. And if a company is a Royal Charter company, there's limited information on Companies House. Is there any advice in this case?
Oh, don't know about that one, to be perfectly honest.
That's challenge you on that one.
You do the beneficial checks on the king, because he would have granted the investor get his proof of home address and ID. Maybe not. I would need to check on that one because I've actually never done a company that's a Royal Charter. So if you get me the details of whoever, we can have a little look into that. Unless, Inga, you know off the top of your head.
No, I don't. That's a new one on me.
Okay, I'm glad we've managed to get a question.
Yeah, good.
Making you think. Right, just to get through, I think for the final ones, as we sort of head towards a close, any training videos that they can recommend for new staff training?
Training videos are a bit tricky. I mean, I think there are some on HMRC because they're not necessarily relevant to your business. So if you find a generic one, and your risk assessment and your policy needs to be relevant to your risks and your business and your staff. I mean, I wasn't going to talk about what we do, but we tend to do more training that's a bit more interactive, and we would even take people's samples of documents in and go through questions and quizzes to try and bring this a bit more to life. There's a sort of induction training, but it's a hard one to just pick a generic training because it needs to be relevant to your business and your risks. So I don't know of any, but Siobhan, have you found?
No, not as specific to our industry. The ones on HMRC is very broad. It's about compliance, and absolutely 100% Inga. It's should be about your risks and what you do as a procedure. So unfortunately, none that I know of.
And as part of the training your teams, they need to have an understanding of the terms. So if HMRC were to turn up and audit you, I mean, that's straightforward enough. You can explain what a TCSP is and what suspicious activity is, but then how you're going to manage that within your own business is much more specific.
Okay. And just a final two questions. I'm not sure whether the one of them linked to a specific something else we were discussing. What about displaying names of these companies via accountants? Sorry, does that work as a standalone question? I'm not.
Yeah, well, I don't think you do have to display names anymore. You used to have to display the company name at the location of a registered office. But actually, I think those regulations changed a few years back that you no longer need a plaque somewhere and an actual company.
Yeah, I need to check. It's under the Companies Act, so I think you're right. I think it has changed, but I would need to check.
I'm pretty sure even when I set up Opstech, it became obsolete, because I looked into it when we were setting up our business. So I'm pretty certain that it's no longer a requirement. We used to have all those clients list, and whether it was scrolling signs rather than boards up with everything, but no, you don't have to provide it.
Okay. And then finally, how often do we need to obtain updated proof of home address from VOs?
Well, you don't need to. So this kind of, I'll add to this question. So when you're auditing your client files, if you have just, say, a beneficial owner of a company, it's been a year since they've joined you, I look at the documents I hold, and I'll go into Companies House and I'll say, yeah, Siobhan's still the director of that company. What documents do I have? I've got the photographic ID, which is a passport. It's still in date. Lovely. I don't need to do anything with that. I look at the home address, and when I got it, it was within 3 months of it being issued. The only thing you would do is check with the client and go, are you still at number 1 High Street? Yeah, that's fine. The only time you would need to get an updated version if the client has moved or if their ID has expired. So once they're still at that address, they have proved it originally. If they haven't moved, then that's fine.
Okay, thank you very much to Siobhan and Inga. You've packed a huge amount of information in. Now, I know Inga said that she wasn't really looking to promote Opstech, but I will say that they're members of the Flexible Space Association, so their company details are on our website and the service provider listings, I'm sure that will be easy to find, and their own website. As we've said, we will be making the recording of this webinar available and also the presentation. Just to add to this is something that the whole area that the Flexible Space Association does quite a lot on. We have a virtual office forum that brings together members and representatives from HMRC, Companies House, police, trading standards and other bodies, which meets 4 times a year, twice virtually and twice in person. And our first meeting of the year is next week. And then we also work with our members to share suspicious activities as well. And we have an alerts portal on our website that's private to our members, but really keen to be utilising that more and for the benefit of the whole industry and also support outside of it. So if anyone hasn't got information on that and is a member of FlexSA, do get in touch with the FlexSA team. Adele particularly looks after that. And if you're not a FlexSA member, this is the perfect time to join. We're offering 6 months free membership to come to workspace operators who aren't currently members as well. So finally, our next Workspace Wisdom webinar is on Thursday, the 2nd of March, when we'll be looking at the topic of securing local media coverage. So something very different again, but hopefully something that will be of real help to workspace operators around the UK. So thank you again to everyone for joining us. Thank you to Inga and Siobhan, and have a good rest of the day. Goodbye.
Thank you.